the applause was thunderous. Glasses chimed, forks hit plates in metallic rhythm, laughter swelled in rolling waves. Dr. of Robert Brooks stood beneath a chandelier dripping with light, his lapel gleaming with a pin shaped like a scalpel. He raised both hands in mock humility, his silver hair slicked neatly back, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hotel ballroom's microphone. 40 years of surgery, he announced. 12 years of, as though reminding the audience of a miracle only he could deliver. And not one of those 40 years felt like work. Not when you love what you do. The crowd cheered louder, a standing ovation this time. Somewhere at the front, his colleagues shouted numbers. 900 procedures? 40 years! Behind the applause. At the edge of the ballroom, where the lights dimmed, Bethany Brooks sat with her napkin twisted tightly in her lap. She was smiling, or at least, her lips were curved upward, in the way she had perfected over 3 decades of dinners, galas, and banquets. But her eyes betrayed her fixed, watchful, with the kind of stillness that comes only from rehearsed survival. She was 34 years old, and to her father, she was still nothing more than the babysitter. Too, the insult arrived casually, carried like an afterthought on the heels of his triumph. And of course, Dr. Brooks continued, my son Michael, the cardiologist who's following in my footsteps, an honor every father dreams of. And my daughter, the pause. Always the pause. A beat too long, like he'd stumbled across her existence by accident. Who works with little ones. I suppose you could say she babysits the next generation. The ballroom erupted in the kind of polite laughter that is half amusement, half complicity. Bethany's throat closed. She reached for her water glass, steadying her hand before anyone could see it tremble. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A single notification lit up the screen. She glanced down, saw the sender, and her chest tightened with something her father had never given her recognition. Harper Foundation. Her future sat inside that unopened email, like a loaded chamber. She slid the phone back into her clutch and looked up at her father, the man bathing in applause, the man who would soon learn what he had never cared to know. 2. But the story didn't begin in that ballroom. It began 3 months earlier, on a damp spring night at her parents' colonial home in Westchester. The dining room was always immaculate, china set with surgical precision, glasses aligned in symmetrical rows, the air faint with rosemary and lemon zest. Dr. Brooks carved roast lamb with the same controlled hands that once held human hearts. 40 years, he declared, slicing through the meat as though dissecting tissue. The hospital's planning a black tie celebration. Michael, I want you to present my Lifetime Achievement Award. Bethany watched her brother raise his glass, every gesture smooth as though he'd been bred for spotlight. It would be an honor, Dad. And you? Bethany. Her father's eyes flicked toward her without really landing. You'll come, of course. I know your schedule's flexible. The knife's edge of that word sliced sharper than the carving blade. Flexible. As if managing 32 preschoolers, writing curricula, and handling state assessments were as casual as picking a day off to shop. As if the years of research, her published thesis, and the waiting list of parents desperate to enroll their children meant nothing more than coloring books and nap time. Of course, she said softly, her voice betraying none of the fire gnawing at her ribs. Her mother slid the green beans across without looking up. Silence filled the space between them, an old, familiar silence. Michael launched into a story about a rare cardiac case he'd solved that week. Their father leaned in, rapt, his eyes alive with pride. Bethany listened, chewing her peas one by one, until her phone buzzed in her lap. One subject line, one invitation. Final interview, Harper Foundation, Director of Education. 12 years of. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out Michael's words about blood flow and arrhythmias. For a fleeting second, she wanted to hold up the screen and shout across the table, "I'm more than what you think I am." But she didn't. She slipped the phone away, her secret safe. Not yet. 2 later that night, back in her apartment, Bethany sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by binders and children's drawings taped to the walls. 12 years of. She opened the Harper Foundation's website on her laptop, her breath catching as the screen glowed in the darkness. 50 million initiative, bridging education and healthcare. It was the first role of its kind, one that required fluency in both worlds. She thought of her work, designing early learning tools that helped pediatric therapists detect developmental delays, translating medical jargon into language parents could understand. Work her father had never once asked about. And then her eyes fell on one name in the list of pending healthcare grants. Brooks Medical Center. Cardiac unit expansion. 5,000 request. Her father's legacy project. She leaned back against the wall, her hand pressed to her mouth. The irony was too sharp, too cruel, too perfect. If she got the position, her father's dream expansion would sit on her desk, his approval dependent on the daughter he dismissed as a babysitter. The next day, Dr. Brooks called. "I need you Thursday," he said, his voice clipped, the sound of a man used to obedience. The gala preparations. Banners, guest lists, centerpieces. "Your mother can't handle it all." "I can't," Bethany answered. "Can't." "Why not?" "I have a professional commitment." There was a pause, then a chuckle that wasn't really laughter. "What kind of commitment does finger painting require?" Bethany gripped the phone tighter. Her nails bit into her palm. "The kind you wouldn't understand." "Don't be dramatic. It's one afternoon. You're being selfish." Selfish. Flexible. Babysitter. The words built a cage around her. But inside, something new was rising. A pressure that felt less like shame and more like combustion. She looked at her calendar. Thursday at 2. The Harper Foundation interview. She met her own reflection in the darkened window and whispered, almost like a vow, "Respect should be constant. But if I can't have that, I'll take power." 2. The week leading to the interview stretched taut like wire. Her father called 3 more times, escalating from irritation to outright threats. "If you can't prioritize family," he said coldly, "perhaps you shouldn't come at all." "Perhaps I shouldn't." The words slipped past her lips before she could stop them, trembling with equal parts fear and freedom. She hung up. For the first time in her life, Bethany chose herself over him. And, as she zipped her interview suit into its garment bag, she realized the next time her father tried to define her in front of the world, the words wouldn't stick. 12 years of. Because she was about to step into a room that would redefine everything. Everything he thought he knew about her. Everything she had never allowed herself to say aloud. Everything she had waited her whole life to become. And when the spotlight finally swung her way, there would be no pause. The subway screeched as it barreled beneath Manhattan, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Bethany clutched her tote bag close, inside it a folder thick with lesson plans, child development data, and notes she'd handwritten in the margins of journal articles. Pages filled with evidence. Proof that her work was not a hobby, not babysitting. Proof of her worth. The train slowed. She stared at the reflection in the window, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes. 12 years of, a suit that didn't quite disguise the faint smear of paint under her nails from art class. A teacher's hands. She wondered, not for the first time, if those hands could hold power. At school that morning, 24 children spilled into her classroom with the force of a tide. Velcro shoes squeaking, backpacks bumping against knees, voices carrying excitement and tears in equal measure. Miss Brooks. He cut in line. Miss Brooks, I drew a rocket. Miss Brooks? My tooth fell out. Her classroom was chaos and symphony at once. On the wall, collages of shapes and letters formed a kaleidoscope. At the back, a sensory corner hummed with quiet focus as two children traced sandpaper letters. Bethany knelt beside a boy who struggled to grip a crayon. His fist clenched, knuckles white. She gently placed her hand over his, guiding his thumb into place. Like this. Try slow. His line steadied. His eyes widened. That small spark, recognition, confidence, was her currency. As the children settled into morning routines, she moved quietly among them, adjusting, encouraging, observing. To anyone else it might look like playtime. But Bethany knew each moment carried data. The pencil grip that hinted at motor delays, the sentence structure that showed cognitive leaps. She documented everything, sending reports to therapists, parents, and specialists who used her classroom as their early warning system. She wasn't just good with kids. She was the first defense against a lifetime of missed diagnoses. 12 years of. But none of that mattered at family dinners where Michael's stories of saving lives always drowned out hers. That evening, her phone rang again. The caller ID glared across the kitchen counter. Dad. She considered letting it ring, but habit, decades of drilled obedience, pushed her to answer. Bethany? His voice came, clipped. You'll be at the hotel tomorrow at 9. We need all hands for setup. I told you. I can't. You won't, he corrected. That's the truth. This family has always sacrificed for one another. You benefited from it. Your education, your apartment, all of it possible because of the life I built. The knife twisted, as always. He spoke of sacrifice while erasing hers. I'll be at the gala, she said, steady. But I won't be at setup. Silence stretched on the other end. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. Lower. Persuasive. Dr. Patterson will be there. She always asks about you. Bethany's stomach clenched. Patricia Patterson. Her mentor, the woman who had guided her through graduate school, who had written the recommendation for Harper Foundation. She'll be there in the afternoon. Her father continued smoothly. Wants to catch up while we're setting up the stage. I told her you'd be free. Her grip on the phone tightened. Patricia's meeting downtown wasn't a casual appointment. It was the Harper interview. He didn't know that. Not yet. But he'd woven his net perfectly. Force her to choose between appearing at the interview and appearing loyal to him. She swallowed. I'll see her at the gala. This attitude of yours, his voice sharpened again. Selfish. Petulant. You don't realize how small your work is compared to the scope of medicine. I realize exactly how small you think it is. Bethany shot back. Before ending the call. Her hands trembled afterward, but it was different this time. Not fear. Something closer to rage tempered into resolve. She stared at her calendar, at the bold block of letters. INTRVW, 2 p.m. She whispered it aloud like a declaration. I choose me. Wednesday bled into Thursday with relentless speed. She stood outside the Harper Foundation tower, its mirrored glass rising into a sky smeared with gray clouds. Her breath fogged the air as she clutched her portfolio, her suit jacket pulled tight. Inside the lobby, marble floors gleamed, and a receptionist with a clipped smile directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride stretched long, each ding marking another layer of her old life peeling away. She thought of her father's voice echoing in her head. Finger. Painting. Babysitter. Flexible. By the time the doors opened, the words had lost their power. The waiting room smelled faintly of cedar, and polished brass. On the wall hung photographs of children in classrooms, alongside medical teams in scrubs, two worlds colliding in curated harmony. She sat, knees pressed together, forcing herself to breathe. This wasn't just about a job. This was about rewriting her place in the story her father had dictated her whole life. The interview began with formality. Margaret Harper herself, elegant in navy silk, sat flanked by board members and Dr. Patterson, whose warm smile steadied Bethany's nerves. "Ms. Brooks," Margaret said, "your resume is impressive. But what intrigues us most is your practical work." Bethany leaned forward. "My classroom isn't just a place where children learn ABCs. It's a laboratory for early intervention. I work with pediatric therapists to identify delays before they become lifelong obstacles. We measure motor skills, language acquisition, social development. We don't wait for problems to explode. We prevent them." Margaret nodded, exchanging a glance with the board. "And you can translate this into large-scale programs?" "Yes. But more importantly, I can translate it into language doctors understand. If a child can't grip a pencil, an educator sees fine motor delay. A physician sees possible neurological issues. Both are valid. But unless they speak to each other, the child gets lost in translation. If for an hour." Bethany outlined her work, her research, her vision for bridging education and healthcare. The board leaned in, scribbling notes. When the stack of pending grant applications slid across the table, her breath caught. There it was, Brooks Medical Center. 5,000 Zaladrid, her father's name, bold at the top. Margaret's voice was calm, almost casual. "We'll need you to evaluate these. Hospitals often include token educational promises to secure funding. We want accountability." Bethany forced her face into neutrality, though her pulse thundered. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Prestige in one area doesn't guarantee competence in another. If they promise education, they'll have to deliver." Margaret's lips curved into a knowing smile. "I like that answer." When the interview ended, Bethany stepped out into the hallway, her body buzzing like it had swallowed electricity. She had done it. She knew it. Her phone vibrated. A text from her brother, "Dad's furious. Says you abandoned him. Just apologize." She typed back one sentence. "I don't apologize for having a career." And for the first time, the words didn't feel defensive. They felt true. She closed her phone, stepped into the elevator, and let the doors seal behind her. The gala awaited. The Marriott Grand Ballroom glittered like a cathedral of glass and light. Chandeliers spilled brilliance across white linen tables, and the air smelled faintly of champagne and over-polished wood. Bethany slipped in 40 minutes late, her heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet. The interview had run long, but she hadn't cared. She'd walked out of the Harper Foundation with fire in her veins. Now, as the double doors shut behind her, the sound of her father's voice filled the room. "Even my daughter could make it." Dr. Robert Brooks boomed from the stage, microphone in hand. Between nap, time schedules, a lauder. The crowd rippled with it, wine glasses raised like accomplices. Bethany froze. The insult sliced through the air clean and surgical, a scalpel in his hands. He'd reduced her, again, to a joke. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A single email lit up the screen. Harper Foundation appointment letter. Director of Education. Bethany's throat tightened. She hadn't expected the confirmation so quickly. The timing was almost cruel, almost divine. She looked up. 12 years of. Her father stood beneath the chandelier, basking in the applause of 300 peers, his son Michael at his side. The legacy, the heir, and her, the babysitter. For the last time. 2. The speeches continued. Polished words about surgery, sacrifice, tradition. Michael spoke with steady confidence, thanking their father for guidance, describing late night study sessions. The crowd listened with rapt admiration, the golden sun shining beneath the spotlight. Bethany sat at the family table, her back straight, her face composed, though inside her chest burned with humiliation layered over defiance. At the next table, 12 years of, a colleague of her father's, Dr. Reynolds, already flushed from too much wine, leaned back in his chair. "There's the babysitter," he called loudly, voice slurring. "Did you bring crayons for us?" A few people chuckled, some awkwardly, some with open derision. His wife shot him a warning glance, but it was too late. The sting landed. Bethany kept her eyes on the stage, though her nails pressed half moons into her palm. She'd learned long ago that if you flinched, they won. Her phone buzzed again. Another email. "Margaret Harper, shall we announce tonight? Or wait until Monday?" Bethany's pulse spiked. Margaret Harper. In this ballroom, she scanned the crowd. Near the back, the woman herself had just entered. Elegant in navy silk, her presence commanding even before she spoke. She was flanked by 2 board members, their faces familiar from Bethany's interview. They moved quietly through the crowd like sharks slipping into shallow water. Bethany exhaled slowly. She hadn't planned for it to unfold like this. But maybe she didn't need a plan. Maybe the truth was enough. Her father tapped the microphone again. "Before dinner, I'd like to thank my family. My wife, Susan, who sacrificed her own career so I could pursue mine. My son, Michael, whose brilliance ensures the Brooks legacy will continue." The applause swelled again. "And my daughter?" His eyes slid toward Bethany, his hesitation naked. "Well, Bethany's also here tonight." A few awkward chuckles. Someone coughed. Bethany's mother stared into her wine glass. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Bethany felt the pause stretch, like wire pulled taut, threatening to snap. And then Margaret Harper stood. "Excuse me?" Margaret's voice cut cleanly across the ballroom, crisp as breaking glass. "I wonder if I might take a moment." The coordinator hurried to offer her a microphone. The audience hushed, whispering. Dr. Brooks looked bewildered but pleased. Recognition from Margaret Harper was never unwelcome. He gestured magnanimously. "Off course, Margaret. Please." Margaret ascended the stage with effortless grace. Her heels clicked softly against the polished wood. "I apologize for the interruption," she said. "But I simply couldn't wait until Monday to share some extraordinary news." Bethany's chest constricted. The moment was here. Margaret smiled out at the audience. "The Harper Foundation is launching a $50 million initiative bridging healthcare and education. For months we have searched for the right leader, someone with expertise, vision, and the courage to stand between these 2 worlds." The crowd leaned forward, anticipating another surgeon, perhaps a dean, another name drawn from their closed circle. Margaret's eyes found Bethany. "That person," she said, her voice resonant, "is Bethany Brooks." The room fell silent, then gasps, then ripples of whispers, disbelieving, recalculating. Bethany rose slowly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. She felt every eye on her, the same eyes that moments earlier had laughed at the babysitter joke. She stepped toward the stage. Each stride felt heavier, but her spine was straight, her gaze unflinching. Her father stood frozen, smile cracking, eyes darting between Margaret and his daughter as though the laws of physics had just betrayed him. Margaret continued smoothly, holding up a sealed folder embossed with the foundation's crest. "Bethany has been appointed Director of Education. She will oversee all educational initiatives and evaluate healthcare grant proposals, including." She let the pause sink deep. "The $5 million request from Brooks Medical Center." The whispering turned to shockwaves. Some hands flew to mouths. Others scribbled notes, already reshaping alliances in their heads. The daughter, the babysitter, the afterthought, now the gatekeeper to her father's legacy. Dr. Brooks tried to recover. "Well," he said, his laugh brittle, "this is quite a surprise. Of course we're proud." Proud. Margaret's voice slid over his like a scalpel. "Dr. Brooks, you must be delighted. Of your daughter's research on neuroplasticity in early childhood has been cited by 15 scholars nationwide. Her thesis is still considered foundational in the field." A ripple moved through the room. Colleagues who had once dismissed her now stared with new calculation. Dr. Patterson, standing near Margaret, added gently, "I had the privilege of mentoring Bethany. I can assure you, her vision is extraordinary." Bethany reached the stage. Margaret handed her the microphone. 300 faces stared. She could have burned him right there. Listed every slight, every dismissal, every joke at her expense. She could have humiliated him the way he had humiliated her. Instead, she breathed once, deeply, and let her voice carry. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm honored. For too long, education has been treated as an afterthought in healthcare. But the truth is this health begins in the classroom. A child who can't describe a symptom grows into a patient who suffers in silence. A child who learns confidence and language early becomes an adult who advocates for their own care." The audience was rapt. Not a fork clinked, not a glass moved. Every doctor in this room once learned to hold a pencil before a scalpel, to recognize shapes before diagnosing patterns, to ask questions before making incisions. Education is not a babysitting service. It is the foundation of everything you do. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint clicking of cameras. Bethany lowered the microphone. Margaret's hand brushed hers in solidarity. And then Margaret added, her gaze sweeping the crowd, "Bethany's team will evaluate all grant proposals, including Brooks. Medical's cardiac expansion. Standards will be rigorous. Vague promises will not suffice." The crowd stirred again. Some administrators looked suddenly pale. Bethany glanced sideways at her father. His jaw was clenched so tightly she thought his teeth might crack. For once, he had no words. And for the first time in her life, Bethany had them all. The applause came slowly at first, hesitant, cautious. Then stronger, building until it filled the room. Not the thunder her father had commanded, but something different. Something real. Doctors approached her after, business cards in hand, eyes sharp with sudden respect. Her brother Michael squeezed her arm gently, whispering, "Beth, this is incredible." Her mother, tears shimmering, whispered, "I always knew." But Bethany only half heard them. Her gaze remained fixed on her father. Still standing beneath the chandelier, the Lifetime Achievement Award in his hands, suddenly looking very small. The ballroom hummed with a different current now. Before Margaret's announcement, all eyes had belonged to Dr. Robert Brooks. His career, his legend, his carefully burnished image. But after, conversations shifted, chairs angled. Business cards slipped discreetly toward Bethany. She stood near the bar. 12 years of. The weight of her appointment letter still buzzing through her veins, fielding questions she hadn't anticipated. "Your thesis, where can I read it?" "Ms. Brooks. We'd love to collaborate on early intervention programs. Could your office consult with pediatrics on developmental screening?" She nodded, accepting cards, offering poised answers, but her thoughts drifted to the man across the room. Her father stood stiffly near his award, the smile on his face a mask stretched too thin. Every so often, someone approached to murmur congratulations. Yet even their glances kept flicking toward Bethany. The orbit had shifted. Michael slipped to her side, voice low. "He's not taking this well." Bethany's eyes flicked toward their father. "He doesn't have to. He just has to adjust. You know him, Michael said gently. Adjusting isn't exactly his specialty. Bethany forced a small smile. Neither is listening. But here we are. Duck. It didn't take long for the confrontation. He cornered her by the dessert table. Away from the noise, his breath sharp with wine. You humiliated me, he hissed. No. Bethany replied evenly, keeping her gaze steady. I spoke about education. You kept this from me, from your family. Sneaking around like someone who knew you wouldn't listen. His jaw tightened. For a moment, words failed him, and that silence, the silence of a man who always had an answer, felt like a victory in itself. Finally, this is revenge. Bethany's voice was calm, but it carried steel. This is professionalism. You don't have to like it, Dad, but you will have to respect it. Later that night, after the applause and the champagne had dulled, Bethany found herself at home staring at her inbox. Messages flooded in. Congratulations, invitations, requests for meetings. But one stood out. Subject, Brooks Medical Proposal from Robert Brooks. The email was short, almost clinical. Bethany, we should discuss revisions to the educational component of our grant. Call me tomorrow morning. Dad, no, congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just business. She closed her laptop, her chest aching with a hollow ache that no title or salary could fill. For years she had craved that sentence. I'm proud of you. Now she had leverage, authority, control. And still, he gave her nothing but necessity. It stung more than she wanted to admit. 2. The next morning, her phone rang before she'd even finished her coffee. Bethany. His voice came, clipped, brisk, as if the previous night had been a dream. I've read through our proposal again. The education section needs work. You'll consult, of course. Bethany took a slow sip. All consultations go through official channels. Submit a request to my assistant. There was a pause, then an incredulous laugh. You're serious? Completely. I'm your father. And I'm the director of education at Harper Foundation. Those are separate roles. This conversation is about work, not family. So yes, submit through official channels. A sharp exhale on the other end. You're punishing me? No, Bethany said quietly. I'm teaching you boundaries. At school that afternoon, the children were wild with Friday energy, their laughter echoing against the walls as they danced to a song about the alphabet. 12 years of. Bethany guided them through activities, her movements automatic, her heart elsewhere. She thought of her father's words, the hollow way he'd asked for her help, not as a daughter, but as a key to unlock funding. She thought of how easy it would be to bend, to let him in, to give him what he wanted. But she remembered something else too. Every time he had dismissed her work, every time he'd turned her into a punchline. If she caved now, she would erase all of that hard, won ground. 12 years of. She looked around the classroom at the children, painting turkeys with stubby brushes, their hands sticky with glue, their voices singing off key. This was why she had fought. This was why she had earned her place. And no amount of paternal guilt could undo it. The following weeks sharpened the tension. Emails from Brooks Medical came in. Draft revisions, proposals padded with buzzwords. Community outreach initiatives that looked thin under scrutiny. Bethany's team flagged them, sending back notes. Insufficient curriculum detail, lack of qualified educators, vague assessment metrics. Each rejection seemed to tighten her father's frustration. He called twice more, his tone veering between cold professionalism and simmering accusation. You're setting impossible standards. They're the same standards for everyone. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly. Which is why you need to meet the requirements. Every word felt like tug of war. And still, beneath her resolve, the ache persisted, the child inside her yearning for acknowledgement, even as the woman demanded respect. One evening, Michael called. "He's unraveling," her brother admitted. "Keeps rewriting drafts at midnight, snapping at his staff. Mom says he hardly sleeps." Bethany closed her eyes. "Because he has to work for something he thought he already owned." Michael hesitated. "Beth, he's scared." "He doesn't say it, but he is. If this grant falls through, it's his legacy. Everything he's built." She swallowed hard. Legacy, always his story. "And what about mine?" she whispered. Michael was silent. The next family dinner was icy. Her mother tried to keep conversation safe. Recipes, neighbors, a new play downtown. But tension pulsed beneath the table. Finally, her father spoke, his fork clinking against his plate. "You could have told us. You could have asked." Bethany replied, "You've always had a chip on your shoulder. And you've always needed to belittle me to feel tall." Her mother flinched. Michael stared at his plate. Bethany's chest rose and fell with controlled breath. "This isn't about winning or losing, Dad. It's about respect. The thing you never gave me until it cost you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her father's eyes were hard, but behind them she caught something she hadn't before. Fear. Not of her. Not of the foundation. Fear of irrelevance. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just her story of proving herself. This was also his story of watching the ground shift beneath him, the control he'd gripped so tightly slipping into her hands. Bethany left the table early that night, walking into the cold air with her coat pulled tight. Her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: Brooks' medical proposal, revisions complete. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, 12 years of. She stood beneath the bare branches of the oak trees, the winter wind threading through her hair. She had wanted validation, love, a simple acknowledgement from her father. What she got was power, leverage, a seat at the table. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. But maybe it didn't have to be. The next move would decide everything. His legacy, her boundaries, the future of both their stories. And for the first time in her life, Bethany realized the decision was hers. Winter thawed into spring when Bethany finally returned to the hospital, not as a child trailing behind her father. 12 years of. Not as an afterthought at dinners, but as a director inspecting the newly minted education wing that bore her influence. The ribbon was cut beneath the camera flashes. Doctors clapped, administrators smiled, but Bethany stood slightly apart, watching the new classrooms fill with color and light. Tables low to the ground. Shelves stocked with sensory tools. Murals painted in bright arcs of yellow and blue. Children would sit here. Learn here. Begin here. Her father took the podium to deliver a speech. The words rolled from him with practiced gravettas. He spoke of innovation, of partnerships, of the essential bridge between medicine and education. For the first time, he mentioned her name 3 times. Director Bethany Brooks. He said, "Whose vision made this possible?" The audience applauded. Cameras turned. Bethany smiled politely, but the sound rang hollow in her ears. Later, during the reception, Michael found her near a display of children's artwork. "He's trying," her brother said quietly. Bethany traced a child's drawing of a heart and a house. "He's adjusting," she corrected. Michael didn't argue. Weeks later, an email arrived. Subject: proposal consultation request from Dr. Robert Brooks. She nearly deleted it without opening. But she didn't. The message was formal, routed through her assistant. He had finally learned. One Tuesday morning, months after the gala, Bethany walked into a preschool classroom to check on a program pilot. She froze in the doorway. Her father was there, sitting awkwardly in a tiny plastic chair, surrounded by 4-year-olds. A tower of blocks teetered in front of him, his large surgeon's hands fumbling as he tried to balance a piece. The children laughed when it collapsed, and for the first time she could remember, he laughed too. After class, he found her in the hallway, his tie loosened, his hair mussed from small hands tugging at it. "It's harder than surgery," he admitted, almost sheepish. "Different muscles, different patients." Bethany searched his face. For once, there was no arrogance there, no dismissiveness, just effort. "Maybe now you understand," she said. "I'm trying to." His voice cracked slightly. For a heartbeat. Bethany felt the sting of the child inside her, the little girl who had wanted nothing more than to be seen, to be loved without condition. But the years of silence, dismissal, belittlement, those couldn't be erased by a single morning with blocks and laughter. She nodded. "Keep showing up." Summer came. Brooks Medical's revised programs thrived. Pediatricians collaborated with educators. Therapists consulted teachers before diagnosis. And children, always the children, found language for their pain, strength in their bodies, confidence in their minds. Bethany walked the halls of the education wing one evening after hours. The classrooms were quiet, sun slanting gold across the tiled floor. Her footsteps echoed. She thought of her father at home, probably drafting another speech, this time crediting our educators. She thought of Michael, who now asked her opinion on his own research. She thought of her mother, who called more often, softer now, careful with her words. And she thought of herself, of the silence she had carried for years, and the fire she had finally chosen to speak with. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, closed her eyes, and let the quiet fill her. It wasn't triumph she felt, not revenge, not even relief. It was something steadier, a kind of peace that came not from being seen by others, but from finally seeing herself. The last time she saw her father in a classroom, he was sitting cross-legged on the rug, listening to a child explain why her drawing had 3 suns instead of 1. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. He just listened. Bethany lingered in the doorway, unseen, watching. For the first time in 34 years, she realized she didn't need his validation anymore. She had built her own. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the tile, her shadow stretching long in the late afternoon light. And as she stepped out into the open air, she whispered the words that had carried her through every dismissal, every slight, every silence.